Judy, it's wonderful that you're here. I have been an admirer of you for many years, professionally, personally, and you were the first person to really show me how integrative medicine really works. How everything that we experience is also patterned and sits in the body, not just the mind, ever. And I think that Americans are ahead of us in this because I understand that there are increasing amounts of American healers who work as psychotherapists, but also as body workers.
Yeah.
And you're one of those people.
Yes.
I wonder if you could start by just telling us then a little bit about the body and its messages.
Yeah. I'd love to, and thank you for having me. I think, obviously I could talk about this for hours and hours, but I think one of the metaphors that's worked for me a lot is that the body is, I think of it as the black box of the human experience, like the black box of an airplane. And so everything that happens to us is recorded in our flesh. So in this skin that we think of as being just sort of sloughed off every kind of 7 to 10 days, it isn't that. It's a much, much deeper connection. And in my own personal studies, I have found that the reason we're so intimately connected, the reason that the actual skin and musculature, this deep tissue of us, is so deeply connected and intimately linked to our experience and our emotions and our feelings and our thoughts even, is that from a very early age, in fact, from embryonic age, the cell, the very cell that becomes our skin, is the same cell that becomes the central nervous system. So without getting into a lot of science, basically, there are 3 cells that we individuate from. And the cell that's on the very outside, our ectoderm, but while we're still in the embryo, turns in on itself to become the brain and the brainstem and the spinal column and all the nerves. And that other outside part is our skin. So we are bookended by the most highly intelligent tissue. And there's a fast track of information between those 2 systems. So every nerve comes back in to the center of us. And we even have a place in our brain, in the cortex, that's not thought at all. It's responsive to touch, our sensory cortex. So
Wow.
Every touch comes and registers much, much more quickly than words. So I don't know if that's sort of, but that's the basis
of... beautifully put.
So that's why I know it works. And my experience with, I guess, about 10,000 hours of hands-on time with people now has shown me over and over and over again that if I massage someone's knee where I see a scar, the entire memory of how they got that scar and any surgeries and any recovery, or difficult or easy, comes up. It's almost like there's a film of the memory of the body part, and it's quite astonishing.
Yeah,
really.
this is very fascinating how a movement or a touch can bring up a pattern of memory.
Yeah.
On a very subtle level.
Yes.
In the body, and then it affects indeed
Absolutely.
the memory.
Absolutely.
And I'm absolutely sure now, having been so inspired by you, that there isn't a separation ever.
No,
so
absolutely.
that there is also not a single thought that sits separately from the body.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. I think we weren't done a great service by Descartes a long time ago. Descartes was an amateur. I should preface this with saying that he felt that there was a separation between the mind and the body, the spirit and the body. And the reason this became his principle, the one that we know about, is that he was actually an amateur surgeon as well as a theologian and a philosopher. And he wanted to get his hands on some bodies. And in order to do that, he had to get permission from the Catholic Church. And in order to get the bodies, he had to sort of tell them, oh, they aren't connected at all. Body's on the way, but then we've kept that. And so we've said, oh no, thoughts are one thing and physical experience is another. It's a great disservice to us. And I will even go further to say that even people that buy into that system 100-fold find a way to use language which of course is more left-brain, Broca's center language, than right-brained, to describe what's going on in their body with things like, oh, I've got such a pain in my neck, or a pain in another body part, or any other. They try to metaphorically tell us what's going on. So I think people that aren't body workers can listen very carefully and hear what people are saying about their physical selves. I'm of two minds, is a phrase I've heard with people who suffer from migraines. I can't stomach this. I can't swallow this. We talk all the time about our bodies.
We don't get away from it,
no,
do we?
Never.
Okay, so can you explain then, if somebody comes to you, what do you pick up with touch and massage? How can you help? How can you accelerate the process of healing?
Yeah, I tend to absolutely ask them why they're with me, and they tend to think they'll tell me, oh, there's a pain here, or I'm having a difficulty here, or I'm tired, or whatever that is, whatever the complaint is. And then when they're on my table, I tend to not do anything except put my hands on them for a moment so that their breath comes in. And most often, the reason they've come through my door is the excuse to come in and tell the bigger story, at least in my practice. So if you're in pain enough to justify a massage, often there's something else underneath. And often because a massage slows you for 1 hour or 90 minutes of time, which we rarely give ourselves. And I focus on breath a lot in my work. And as it slows down, whatever's been pushed tends to come up. I find that body tension, muscular tension, obviously if there's been an injury, it's manifold. But there's a sense of, if you slow down, what you're trying to recognize comes up. And pain gets our attention almost better than anything. People that plow through their lives that suddenly can't lift their shoulder, have to look at what's going on.
Yeah.
And they got it, the attention is gotten. And then when I pay attention and we respect, we see again what's going on.
It's a beautiful opportunity, isn't it, when a body part no longer wants to cooperate.
Absolutely.
An opportunity to look, because also it doesn't lie. There's no interpretation here.
No. It is what it is. It can't. It doesn't have nuance, really. It says, ouch. Please pay attention to me. Please touch me. Please come close to me. I love, there's in Swedish Massage, which I think we'll talk a little bit about later if we have time, but in Swedish Massage there's a stroke called friction. And it's where there's been an injury. Often we get something called scar tissue, which is collagen. It's a threefold helix of fiber. It's the stickiest, strongest substance in the human body, and it's how we repair soft tissue injury. It works magnificently until it attaches to everything around it that has nothing to do with the injury. So when someone comes and has to use friction, you're touching everything around it, and this happens not just in the body. It happens in the emotions and the thoughts about an accident, say, or an injury. And this is true in life too. We have to sort of come near the things that we're trying not to touch, where we've been wounded. You see what I'm saying? So metaphorically, something will lock up, get touched, and then you'll see the bigger implications of it. A lot of things are touched. Then you free it up so that scar tissue holds together what it needs to, but doesn't make you walk like, the Hunchback of Notre Dame your whole life, simply because your shoulder got hurt once.
And you get then the wonderful domino effect, of course.
Absolutely.
Possibility.
Oh, yeah. Because every tissue in the body is contiguous. So if you're hurting up in your neck, your foot's going to hurt. It's all connected. There's no way that they're isolated. There is no way.
Yeah, fantastic. Taking that a bit further then, Judy, how do you distinguish between Eastern and Western modalities? Or can you explain what the difference is, and when why would you decide to go one way or another? How do you integrate them in your work?
Well, I should start by saying that in New York State, which is where I trained, you're required to learn both systems, both modalities, in order to qualify for licensure. So I can honestly say I'm not sure I went into learning about it out of as much desire as necessity. But having said that, I find them both absolutely important. Because, for a start, most people I work with are more from a Western background and Western medicine, which allows us to see anatomically and physiologically the body as, yes, the sum of its parts, but basically if someone comes to me for a shoulder, they want you to feel you rubbing their shoulder. They don't really want me to touch the outside of their left leg, although I do with frequency. And they go, why are you doing that? And that's how I integrate them always in my own practice. So as an overview, I would suggest that the basis of Swedish massage, which is probably about 140 years old in terms of its formality, is based on moving lymphatic tissues and moving blood through musculature. So you're really creating a lot of heat in the body. You're mimicking the different strokes. Effleurage really works with the skin. Petrissage works with the deep musculature of the body, and it mimics what muscles do, so that we're pumping muscle, getting warmth through the body, and then when you flush all of that out again, you're moving stagnated tissue fluids. And then with the friction, as I mentioned before, you're separating tissues that have gotten stuck together. On top of this, now we have other sort of release techniques for people with fibromyalgia, things like that, where you're starting to get really sticky fibrous things that are happening, and so you aren't able to complete a range of motion and things like that. So you're thinking much more, I think, in Western massage practices, much more about the system as a biological self, if you would, or anatomical self. Whereas Eastern medicine doesn't separate this at all. It sees everything contributing, including the climate around, the story of how a person is living, the food they're eating, the hours they aren't sleeping, the hours they do sleep, when you can't get out of bed, when you have hot in your body, when you're cold, are your limbs cold, what foods do you want? So I'm much more drawn to this, being a storyteller. I find this a much, much more interesting and kind of holistic way, if you will, not even kind of, very holistic way of approaching care. Because people tend to think their habits don't mean anything, but I think they mean everything. And in Western massage, you get habitual motion, repetitive stress, and repetitive injury, but I think we have repetitive injury on every level. I find often people that have ulcers, heat, also have really stressful muscles because usually their blood pressure's up, and usually I could look to heart issues in Chinese medicine, which would be the fire element. So I tend to marry both these systems to get a narrative. And sometimes I have clients who are very, very in a Western system of thought, and I just will suddenly say, maybe I'll work on their arm here, and I'll say, oh, are you waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning? And they go, how do you know that? You know, like I've somehow read something off the wall behind them, but their body has told me. Because where I've touched and where I've felt stagnation is associated with a certain 2 hours on a 24-hour time clock, which is given to me by Chinese medicine. So in knowing that system, I then say, is something going on? And then I know that 3 to 7 a.m. hours are often associated with grief. So I say, is there any grief? Is there any process with letting go going on? There may not be, and I'll just float it out. And then they'll go, how do you know that? And then as that becomes true and they see that their body is not betraying them, their body is not letting them down like everyone else in their life, or whatever that is, the more I'm able to unpack what their body is telling me, the more they grow in compassion for themselves.
Beautiful.
And they say, yeah. And then they go, oh gosh. And I'm able to help with just some self-help things or just some knowledge for them. And they're able to lift a little bit out of it. But then the Western just helps everything feel better. Because when you move, tends to be when we're in stressful points, we kind of like deer in a headlight get frozen. Whether we're frozen with armor that's strong or we get quite soft and it's frozen in a different way where we're lethargic and can't move, both of those cause pain. So both systems work well. So one for me gives me a whole way of viewing someone through all the colors they love, the colors they hate. The whole system is there. And then the Western allows me to hold them in the way they're used to being held, so it doesn't feel so out there and outlandish that they can't accept it.
It's absolutely incredible. So you're also illustrating here how you work as a psychotherapist, because the information that you get from the Chinese system gets you right to the heart of the matter.
Correct.
You don't need any other information taking hardly, do you?
No.
And so it can be, you can make huge changes very quickly.
Absolutely. And also they can't pretend it's not happening in their body. Whereas I don't tend to bump into the same level of verbal bandying. It's much, much quicker for me, because their body can't play a game. In fact, it's so relieved that someone's heard it, usually. They're like, oh, phew. And the breath comes in.
Yeah.
And sometimes, emotions come up. And it's not just tears and sadness. Sometimes people are angry, and sometimes people have been deeply hurt. And sometimes people are...
Yeah, and that can sit in the body for years, can it not?
Absolutely.
So, can you make a link for me, since what you're really telling me is that the body, you call it the black box, and I'm thinking, well, maybe it's maybe it's our unconscious, maybe... And there are a lot of effective therapists who use trance, who use guided imagery. Yeah. Can you make a connection with those two things?
I think so. I think anytime you get relaxed enough and your breath moves and you're in a place, I think there's some kind of a transactional and trance state happening. And that's been my experience always with massage. And to the point of, also at the end of a massage, just encouraging someone that they might feel stronger or rest better, and they tend to, so that we arrive at a place where we're quite malleable of spirit and mind and feel safe, so something can come in. So, but in terms of the trance, I think this could be best illustrated by a client of mine in New York. I have had a number of clients who've been quite damaged and in terms of having been abused sexually, men and women, and they have found their way to my practice. So my early days, I had quite a number of referrals from psychologists and psychiatrists in Manhattan. One woman I knew had been harmed by her father, and the psychologist that referred her to me told me this, but did not tell me that the abreaction was this blood-curdling scream. Anytime a memory would come up about this incident, she screamed at the top of her lungs, which was really frightening in my little apartment in New York, because I wasn't prepared, and it was shocking and deeply distressing. And I thought, I'm maybe out of my league here, because I was a young body worker at the time. But it always was this one body part, this one part of her body where this scream emerged in a massage. Everything, and then at the end she'd said, it was wonderful. She had no memory of the scream, none. And I told her at the second session that I was glad it felt better, but I felt I needed someone who had more qualification, and it was a client, a colleague of mine. So we worked together with her permission, because he was a man and she was uncomfortable with it. And so we worked together. And again, my energy went back to this body part, which happened to be an ankle. And on the second to the last session, after about 9 months of working together, this woman and her ankle drew me one last time, and finally the professional I was working with, who is a therapist, came near and asked to speak to the ankle. And out from this client of mine came the tiniest little girl voice, explaining that she hated the ankle, and that the ankle was why her father caught her. Her father was chasing her in the woods, and she stumbled, and he grabbed that ankle, and she blamed it for being the cause of everything. And in this moment, in this body work session with my colleague and this beautiful woman, she made a truce with that ankle and realized that the ankle hadn't let her down, that someone had harmed her and she was not part of it. And she never sprained her ankle again. She stopped coming, and in that moment her life was absolutely transformed. So it was hidden there. She had broken the ankle, dropped bricks on the ankle, fallen off a shoe up to get her master's diploma. I mean, the ankle took it all. And so it was telling a story. Over here is the key. Over here, psst, and not so psst, huge things. You know, it was broken here.
Yeah, this is a very good illustration of how trance hypnosis really, because she wasn't aware of what was going on in these sessions.
No.
And the body
Took over.
work together, and
Yeah.
where they're functioning from the same place.
Absolutely.
Finally, I'd like you to tell us what you're doing with all your experience and knowledge. This very unique way that you bring together psychotherapy and body work. Where are you going with this? How are you going to share it with us?
Well, I very much am looking forward to writing. I write as well, and so I'd like to try to find a book, something about the landscape I call me or something like that, but where I actually invite people into this dialogue with themselves, perhaps in a different way. But I'm also teaching, which is a new position for me at Finger Lakes School of Massage now, and what I thought would be a massage teaching job has become actually a very different position where I've been invited to be kind of shepherding one of the programs there, so really working as almost guidance counselor, mentor type role with students. So yes, I know what they're learning, but also helping them become the vessels that know how important it is to hold those clients. It's not just a sports massage ever. It's everyone. It's a dream. When an athlete comes to you, it's a dream, and it's when someone who's bereaved comes, you're holding every memory of every loved one and the process that they must now go into. If someone's having a baby, it's another story. So it's trying to remind one another, I guess, as we students immediately, my clients that'll be new in the United States, but also myself, that each moment of working with someone is the opportunity to hold a story. And if we hold one another's stories, we'll remember we're more the same than we are different. And in that, I think all of us are healed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.